What if you discovered on the eve of your wedding that the person you promised to share your life with had cheated on you? What if this betrayal had happened the night before the big day, while you slept dreaming of the dress, the vows, the new life you barely knew was already starting out broken? Have you ever asked yourself this kind of question? I have. And no matter how much time passes, there are still days when it returns, whispering softly, "What if I had found out that night? Would everything have changed? Or would it have been worse?" At the time, I was just a girl full of hope. My heart was racing, my suitcase packed for the honeymoon, the decorated room, the names on the favors. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect even. He smiled so much, was so kind, so present, and I, poor thing, thought this was love. I thought I'd finally found a man to call my own. Only, that very night, as I was replaying the ceremony steps in my head, he was with someone else. Yes, you got it right. My husband cheated on me the night before our wedding, and I went there the next day, veiled and wreathed, to swear eternal love to someone who had already betrayed me before we even said "I do." It may seem absurd, it may even seem like a lie, but it's true. One of those truths no one tells, that many people hide, that some try to bury. But I kept it, in silence. And now I've decided to tell it. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. That day, I woke up early, like any anxious bride. The bridesmaids were about to arrive, the makeup artist was already on his way, and my mother was constantly running around. I looked at everything with a lump in my throat, but a good lump, you know, the kind you feel when you're about to live a dream. But deep down, way down, there was something off. It wasn't anything I could explain. It was just a strange sensation, a slight uneasiness, as if my body knew something my mind didn't yet want to see. He showed up at the church as if nothing had happened, handsome, neat, confident. He took my hand, looked me in the eyes, and lied, with the same face I'd grown to love, with the same voice that so often promised me the world, and I believed him. Oh, how I believed him. Have you ever been there? Have you ever had that moment when you look back and think, how did I not see? How did I not feel? Well, yes. Sometimes love is so loud that it silences the signals. And that day, amidst the flowers, the music, and the applause, I was deaf to myself. I discovered the truth years later, and yet, when I did, it was as if it had happened at that very moment. Because there are pains that don't age. There are wounds that time doesn't heal. They only numb. And when they awaken, they come back with a vengeance. They come with images you didn't experience, but you begin to see as if you had been there. He, in some random room, taking his wedding ring from his pocket and the commitment of his conscience. And I, at home, on the other side of town, sleeping alone for the last time, thinking I was about to be happy. I'll tell you everything. No frills, no lies, because the truth can hurt, but it also sets you free. And telling this today isn't to harbor resentment, it's to transform. Because I know there are many women out there living the same thing in silence. And if this story touches even one of them, it will have been worth opening up this part of my memory. Now that you know where it all began, I want to take you back with me to that night, the one he went out for some air, and show you how, even without knowing it, my body tried to warn me that something wasn't right, that the fairy tale was about to become a tarnished memory. Because that's where the story truly began, not at the altar, but in absence, in the lie, in what he did when he thought I'd never find out. Because that's where the story really began, not at the altar, but in the absence, in the lie, in what he did when he thought I'd never find out. And if, while listening to this, you felt something inside, maybe a shiver, maybe a memory, or even a desire to scream for someone who once hurt you in silence, I understand. I truly do. Because stories like this aren't just mine. They're many others, and maybe they're a little bit yours too. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most. It could be a word, a memory, an experience. Sometimes writing is the first step to healing. And when we share, someone else reads it and realizes they're not alone. Your story, however simple it may seem, could be just what someone needs to read today. And if you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through this little slice of my life, please leave a like on this video. It's more than a button. It's a way of saying, this conversation matters. Because it really does. It matters to me, to you, and to anyone who will come here looking for a little truth amidst so many masks. And if this kind of content touches you in any way, if you believe that sincere stories deserve space, subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people who may now be experiencing what I experienced back then, alone, in silence, needing to hear something like this to feel seen. But now, going back to that night, there was one specific moment I've never forgotten. A small phrase thrown out at random that should have woken me up right then and there. And that's what I'm going to tell you about now. My dress was hanging on the door, my heart in the clouds, that kind of joy that fills your whole body, as if the whole world were smiling just for you. It was as if everything had finally fallen into place. The party details were ready, the flowers had arrived early, and I could already imagine myself walking down the aisle with that barely there smile. He seemed calm, serene, too much so, and I, blinded by love, saw it as a sign of maturity, of security. In truth, it was distance. It was guilt well disguised as tranquility. That night he kissed me on the forehead and said he was going out for an hour. Just to clear my head, he said, like someone who needs a breather before taking an important step. And I, completely in love, thought it was beautiful. I even thought it was sensitive. A conscious man, I thought. But he didn't go out to think. He went out to cheat. What revolts me most today isn't the act itself. It's the coldness, the careful hiding, the act of acting as if nothing had happened, the confidence in returning home and sleeping peacefully, as if his body hadn't just betrayed all the vows that hadn't even been made yet. And there I was, sleeping like someone living a dream, unaware that the next day I'd be saying yes to someone who had just said no to me with his own body. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's a huge difference between what we idealize and what we accept. I idealized love. I wanted what I saw in old movies, in soap operas with happy endings. I wanted to feel safe in someone's arms. Except I accepted much less. I accepted absence disguised as commitment. I accepted apologies said tenderly, but empty on the inside. And that was one of the greatest revelations of my journey, realizing that self-deception is also a form of abandonment. For a long time, I thought he was the only one who had deceived me. But gradually I realized that on some level I was wrong too. I saw the signs. I saw his distant demeanor, his unexplained absences, his nervousness in some conversations. But instead of investigating, I justified it. I told myself it was the stress of marriage, that every man has a somewhat detached way, that I was overreacting. And that's when my mentality began to crack. Because when we romanticize others too much, we begin to devalue our own intuition. And that's exactly what I did. I traded my sixth sense for hope, my sensitivity for ready-made excuses, and all of this out of fear of facing the hidden truth that, if I'd seen it at the right time, might have avoided so much pain. But love has a strange way of keeping us silent. We think that loving means enduring, that sacrificing is a sign of surrender, that distrust is a lack of faith. But it's not. True love doesn't require blindness. True love allows us to see. It allows us to feel. It allows us to question. And when it doesn't, we know something's wrong. On that wedding eve, my soul knew. I felt it. A sensation I can't explain. A slight restlessness, as if some part of me was trying to wake me up. But like any enchanted bride, I suppressed it. I chose the dress, reviewed the vows, and put that feeling to sleep along with my reason. Years later, when I discovered everything, it wasn't the betrayal itself that devastated me. It was realizing how much I'd kept quiet for fear of destroying a dream, how much I'd wanted to believe, that I'd preferred to ignore reality. The pain of being betrayed is great, but the pain of betraying yourself is even greater. And it was at this point in my life that the transformation began, not overnight, but slowly, like someone returning to themselves after a long time away from home. I began to question, to write, to unearth parts of myself that had been forgotten in the name of a love that never existed the way I dreamed. This process showed me that not all truth comes from others. Sometimes it lives inside us, hidden, quiet, waiting for us to stop running and finally listen. And I listened. Late, perhaps. But I listened. Comment here. That makes sense to me. I want to know if you, too, have ever silenced your intuition to support something that, deep down, you already knew was wrong. The night before, he'd said he was going out to unwind with a friend. He said he needed to breathe, clear his mind, get his thoughts in order before the big day. I trusted him, because, until then, everything in me still believed he was nervous, that it was just anxiety, that men have this habit of withdrawing, of isolating themselves a bit when they're about to take an important step. And once again, I chose to believe, not out of naivete, but out of desire, because sometimes what we want to feel is stronger than what we actually feel. But there was something strange in the air, the way he avoided my gaze, how he took longer than expected to return, how his phone remained face down the entire time, small details, but ones that wouldn't go unnoticed if we were actually looking. But that night, I refused to really look. I embraced silence as protection, embraced the illusion, and went to sleep telling myself, everything will be okay. It's funny how the body senses it before the mind understands. My stomach was tight, my heart was racing for no reason. I tossed and turned in bed, trying to ignore the restlessness. But now, looking back, I know it was my inner self trying to warn me, and I kept quiet. He returned around midnight, with a forced smile and a changed perfume. It wasn't the same scent as always. It had a strange undertone, a sweet touch I wasn't used to. I noticed, but I swallowed hard. He kissed my forehead, told me he loved me and couldn't wait for the next morning. And I smiled. I forced myself to smile. I clung to that scene like someone holding onto a rope about to snap. And here comes one of the hardest parts of this story: self-abandonment. That moment when you know deep down that something is wrong, but prefer to suppress your instincts just to keep the situation going. We think we're being strong, but deep down, we're just postponing greater pain. And that's exactly what I did. I traded the truth for a few hours of fantasy, just so I could walk up that altar with my head held high, even with my heart already broken. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what struck me wasn't just the fact that he left that night. It was his behavior before and after. It was the vague words, the too quick hugs, the eyes that avoided mine when we saw each other in the mirror. It was the small decisions, the subtle gestures that, together, screamed what he would never have the courage to say. This made me understand that betrayal doesn't always begin with the act itself. Sometimes it begins with silence, with distance, the moment someone decides to hide who they really are just to save face. The real transformation came years later, when I allowed myself to revisit that night, not as a victim, but as a woman who survived. And surviving, in this case, doesn't mean emerging unscathed. It means resisting, taking a deep breath even when the pain is profound, and more than that, rebuilding one's own vision of love. Because the most dangerous thing about betrayal is what it does to our ability to trust. We distrust not only the other person, but ourselves, and that's the true impact. I realized over time that it wasn't about him leaving or who he was with. It was about the fact that he chose to do so on that very night, the eve of our engagement, the setting of what would become our story. It wasn't just a slip-up, it was a decision, a conscious choice to put desire above promise. And that choice said a lot about the kind of man he was, and even more about the kind of woman I no longer wanted to be, the one who accepts. Recalling all of this today, calmly, made me see what I didn't have the strength to see back then. It made me understand that intuition isn't an exaggeration, that discomfort isn't a whim, and that silence solves nothing. What we hide grows, and I hid so much inside myself for so long that I almost forgot who I was before that night. Write it down. I'm on this journey too, if any part of this story spoke to you. Sometimes, just seeing that there are more people on this path makes your heart feel a little less alone. Years later, I learned that one of my friends saw him entering a hotel room with another woman. That night, the same night, he told me he needed to breathe, that he needed some time before the big day. She saw it, and she remained silent. It wasn't out of malice, according to her. It was out of fear of seeing me fall apart. She didn't want to carry the burden of tearing me from my dream, of making me face that harsh truth at such a delicate moment. But deep down, what she did was exactly that. She left me alone inside an illusion, while everyone around me already knew the truth. This was one of the greatest shocks I've ever experienced in my life, Because when pain comes from someone you love, it hurts. But when it comes from the omission of someone you trusted, it corrodes. I wondered for a long time how many other people knew. How many smiles did I receive at that ceremony from people who looked at me with pity, not joy? How many glasses were raised to our love out of sheer convenience, cowardice, or sheer conformity? It's at this point that we realize how collective silence can be as violent as the betrayal itself. Because no one warned me, no one pulled me aside, no one had the courage to open my eyes. And I understand, in part, people don't like to interfere. They don't want to seem invasive. But sometimes, what saves a life isn't kindness, it's courage. The courage to say what needs to be said, even if it hurts, even if it scratches. Because there's a huge difference between causing pain and avoiding tragedy. And when I learned about it, when that friend told me what she saw, it wasn't just the scene that came flooding back. It was a whole chain of memories I'd never questioned. The hushed conversations, the glances between him and another woman that didn't seem normal, the disappearances at suspicious moments, all of it took on new meaning. It was as if the puzzle I'd spent years putting together incorrectly suddenly began to make sense. And what hurt wasn't just seeing the final image. It was remembering that I'd been ignoring the pieces that didn't fit. The hidden truth wasn't just in him. It was in the environment around him, in the people who knew but didn't speak, in the gestures that shouted and I remained silent, in the choices I made, the ones I didn't make, and the ones I was allowed to make without knowing. This is a part of the behind-the-scenes story no one likes to talk about. When you're betrayed not only by the person you married, but also by the silence of the people who claimed to love you. And you know what impacted me most? It was realizing that I've been on the other side myself, that at some point in my life, I might have also seen a friend walking toward an abyss and remained silent. Because silence is comfortable. It absolves us of responsibility. But the price it exacts later is devastating. Because what we hide from others eventually explodes within us. And when it explodes, there's not just guilt left behind, there's regret. The mindset I began to develop from this was to no longer accept this kind of empty loyalty. I didn't want people around me who only applauded me when everything seemed perfect. I needed people who had the courage to shake me if necessary. People with true souls. People who understood that love is also proven in pain. That sometimes the good we do is pull someone out of a dream before it turns into a nightmare. This journey taught me that the truth, however harsh, is always more worthy than omission. Because omission is passive betrayal. It's when you don't directly commit evil, but allow it to happen before your eyes without moving a comma. And for me, that hurts almost as much. Now that you've heard all this, I want to ask you, have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever been silenced by someone who should have protected you? Or have you ever remained silent when you knew you needed to speak up? Comment below. That makes sense to me. Because only when we share these truths does our healing truly begin. As I smiled at the altar, he smiled back, and only he knew what he'd done hours earlier. I, dressed in white, my hands sweating nervously and my eyes welling with emotion, thought I was living the first day of the rest of my life. I thought I was sealing a love story, starting a home, making a commitment of my soul. But he was just acting, playing the role of the loving groom so masterfully that for a time, he even convinced me. The cruelest thing is remembering the details of that morning. The song I chose with such care, the way he looked at me when I walked in, the light squeeze of my hand as we exchanged vows. Everything seemed sincere. Everything seemed pure. And as the guests grew emotional, as my mother wiped away a tear and my father handed me over with trembling arms, he already carried the weight of what he had done on his shoulders. And yet, he smiled, as if nothing had happened. This is one of the hardest parts of betrayal, the other person's ability to carry on as if everything was fine, as if they hadn't destroyed what was most sacred to you. I said yes in front of everyone, unaware that I was accepting not just a partner, but an entire lie wrapped in a suit and tie. And perhaps that's why the memory of that day hurts me more than the discovery itself, because he let me live that moment to the fullest, even though he knew it was already a farce to him. It's curious how the brain works. Once we discover the hidden truth, everything changes color. We revisit memories through a different lens. What was sweet becomes bitter. What was funny becomes strange. What seemed like love becomes manipulation. It's like remembering a song that once soothed your heart, but now hurts just by playing it. Because betrayal doesn't just tear the present apart, it rewrites the past. It undoes even what was good. And this has a profound impact on how we learn to trust again. Many people think the worst part of betrayal is the act itself. But for me, what truly tears you apart is what happens behind the scenes. It's the silence the person maintains afterward. It's the theater, the disguise, the sequence of cold, calculated decisions that come before and after. It's seeing that someone had time to give up the lie and didn't, that they had the chance to be honest and chose to hide it. And yet, they had the courage to look you in the eye and promise eternal love, with a firm voice, their hand on their heart, and the taste of guilt still in their mouth. I looked at him and thought, how do you do it? How can someone put a ring on their finger, knowing that hours before they were in the arms of another? How does their conscience not scream? How does their body not tremble? But he did it, and it made me understand that some people just don't feel the way we do. They love differently, or maybe they've never truly loved. That's when a painful transformation begins within us. We stop asking ourselves, why did he do this to me? And start reflecting, why didn't I realize it sooner? And this shift in mindset is what truly moves the soul, because it makes us face our own flaws in perception, our desperate desire to believe the best in people, even when the signs scream otherwise. It's easy to judge from the outside. Many people would say, I should have felt it, that I should have suspected. But anyone who has ever loved knows we don't see clearly when we're inside. We see with our hearts, and the heart, when it loves too much, becomes blind, deaf, and mute. It makes excuses, creates justifications, rationalizes absurdities. It builds a castle on sand and swears it's stone. But that ceremony, that yes I gave without knowing the truth, marked the beginning of a journey that would change the way I lived. It was there, in that church filled with flowers, applause, and smiles, that I began living the biggest lie of my life, and also, unbeknownst to me, the greatest lesson I would yet learn. Write down, I'm on this journey too, if you've ever been through something like this, because sometimes all we need is to know that we're not the only one who was deceived while believing they were living a dream. There were things that didn't fit, cold touches, empty kisses, too many apologies. But love blinds, right? We think it's just a phase, that it's work stress, that it's fear of commitment, that it will pass. And we fool ourselves with the same words that no longer warm us. The heart feels before the mind understands. And so does the body. The body reacts. It shrinks when touched by someone who no longer loves us. It shivers when it receives a hug that no longer provides shelter. It falls silent when presence becomes absence with a name. I began to notice small cracks in what, on the surface, still seemed like a solid relationship. He no longer looked me in the eye like before. He didn't laugh at my stories. He didn't ask how I felt. And when he did, it seemed more like formality than genuine interest. It was as if he'd shed his skin after marriage, and I only realized this when I was already in the emotional trap, when routine became a stage and love, a script. These cracks don't appear all at once. They're silent. They begin with a shifty glance, an absent touch, a small lie, and before we know it, it's become an abyss. And we try to fill this void with effort, with understanding, with affection, thinking it's up to us alone to rebuild what's crumbling. We change our mindset and begin to justify what should scare us. He's just tired. He's just distant because he has a lot on his mind. It'll get better. But it doesn't. Because the hidden truth behind all of this is that when someone betrays our trust, the emotional absence comes before the physical. I found myself sleeping next to a stranger, smiling at an illusion. And yet, I continued to believe the problem was me, that maybe I wasn't enough, that I needed to try harder, be better, be more understanding. This is the cruelest impact of silent betrayal. It convinces you that it's your fault. And in this internal game of trying to rescue what's already been lost, we lose ourselves too. It's painful to realize that someone who claimed to love you is capable of deceiving you in every detail. That while calling you life, they might be longing for something else. That they might be swearing their love while secretly exchanging messages, hiding their scent, covering their tracks, disguising their guilt with gifts or forced kindness. These cracks, which began as small annoyances, became open wounds, but on the outside, I still smiled. I still made dinner. I still held your hand in public. I still said, "I love you," as if repeating a habit. And that's where the silent transformation begins. Because a part of us dies a little each day. It loses its shine, its lightness, its spontaneity. We begin to live on the defensive, with our hearts set on edge and our eyes dry. The lightness of love gives way to vigilance, and complicity turns into doubt. I became someone who observed more than I felt, and this exhausted me deeply. But how do you leave a place where love still lives in fragments? How do you abandon a story where you've invested everything, even knowing you're alone? It was at this point that I realized that not all betrayal is blatant. Some betrayals are made of omission, of indifference, of subtle contempt. Some betrayals don't require a hidden kiss. A constant emotional absence is enough, and my body knew it. Every time he approached me and didn't look at me, every time he pulled away after a cold touch, every time I heard silence where words had once been spoken, my body felt what my mind stubbornly ignored. This was no longer love. It was attachment. It was fear. It was memory. And this realization, as harsh as it may be, is the beginning of a new journey. Because you can't heal what you pretend isn't hurt. And I started to admit to myself that something was very wrong. I began to understand that it wasn't about what he said, but about what he wasn't showing. That it wasn't about the marriage itself, but about the lie that sustained it. It was an internal process of rebuilding, of reclaiming my worth, of getting out of autopilot mode and looking at myself with sincerity again. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Comment below. This makes sense to me if you've ever felt something was wrong even without proof. Because sometimes intuition is the only truth we have the courage to face. It was at a family gathering, one of those seemingly harmless ones. Laughter, food, childhood memories spread out on the table like marked cards. It had been years. I no longer spoke about the wedding, nor did I discuss the doubts that silently gnawed at me. I had learned to keep it to myself, to smile on the outside while everything inside still throbbed. I thought I was at peace with the past, that certain pains we simply push down until we forget. But that day, in that room full of people who only half knew my story, something slipped out. And it wasn't from me. A younger cousin, glass in hand, tongue loose from the alcohol, began to laugh loudly at some poorly told joke, and in the midst of the laughter came the sentence. A simple, cutting sentence that cut through the room like a knife. That day at the hotel, nobody forgets, right? Imagine if the bride knew. The silence fell in a way I'll never forget, as if the air had been sucked in by a single collective breath. She tried to correct herself, laughed nervously, said it was a joke, but it wasn't. The eyes around her said it all. In that moment, everything my body already knew and my mind refused to accept fell into place. What I felt in my skin, in the averted glances, in the empty touch, in the cold night spent beside someone who was no longer there, was true. Betrayal wasn't just a hypothesis. It existed. It was real. And it wasn't revealed out of remorse, regret, or love. It was leaked out of distraction, as if it no longer mattered, as if it were just a funny memory of an old mistake. But for me, it was the scar that still bled. The pain was mixed with anger, not just from him, but from everyone who knew, from those who saw, from those who heard, from those who suspected and never said anything, from the friend who preferred silence so as not to ruin my day, from his family who embraced me at the altar, knowing what he had done the day before, from my own family who suspected but felt it wasn't the right time to warn. The hidden truth that had been buried for so long beneath appearances finally came to light, and not through anyone's courage, but through the carelessness of a joke. You know what's hardest? It's not knowing he cheated on me. It's realizing that so many people thought I didn't need to know, that my fabricated happiness was more important than my real dignity. It's the impact of understanding that, at that wedding, I was the only one who went in blindfolded. Everyone else already knew what was going on behind the scenes. I was the main character in a ceremony built on lies, and I was the last to know the script. When the truth finally arrived, it didn't come as a liberation. It came as a burden, a new kind of grief. And it was at that point that my mindset began to shift. Because until then, I'd been trying to justify it. I'd been trying to understand what was missing, what I'd done wrong, what could have been different. But that day, In that seemingly banal meeting, it became clear that I wasn't to blame. I was the one deceived, and that changes everything. It's no longer a story of a love that failed. It's the story of a love that was never whole, of a relationship that began with hidden cracks. The revelation was like opening an old wound, yes, but it was also the first step toward true healing. I began to relive every moment of that marriage with new eyes, every gesture, every absence, every excuse. The pieces began to fit together, no longer with resentment, but with clarity. The veil of illusion fell, and in its place, a new version of me remained, more aware, stronger. Because transformation doesn't happen when the pain subsides. It begins when we decide to look at it without looking away, when we stop protecting others from the truth and start protecting ourselves from lies. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Write down, I'm on this journey too. If you've ever experienced this kind of late revelation and had to relearn how to trust afterward, it wasn't just him I was losing. It was the woman I thought I was. I felt small inside, as if everything that defined me until then, the strength, the joy, the confidence, had shattered along with the image of him waiting for me at the altar. It's hard to explain to someone who's never been through it, because it's not just about the betrayal itself. It's about the feeling of having been deceived not just by a person, but by reality itself. I looked in the mirror and no longer recognized myself. For a long time, I couldn't get ready anymore. It sounds silly, I know, but the simple act of choosing an outfit, putting on lipstick, looking into my own eyes, all of that became an effort, because my self-esteem had already gone down the drain from sleepless nights and unanswered questions. I began to doubt myself in everything, my decisions, my worth, my ability to be loved. It was as if his mistake had lowered me to a place where I no longer deserved to trust even myself. And that, my dear, is a kind of prison no one sees, but one that slowly suffocates. And it wasn't just emotionally that this hit. My body felt it too. Insomnia, fatigue that wouldn't go away, chest pain that no test could explain. And then I understood what many people only discover when they reach their breaking point. Emotional pain doesn't stay in your head. It spreads. It takes over your body, your routine, your energy. I stopped going out. I even distanced myself from my family and friends. Everything reminded me of the farce, and I felt ashamed, as if the betrayed person was to blame, as if I were the fool in the story. This impact is silent. You keep living, but inside, it slowly fades. And the worst part is, no one notices, because we learn to smile to hide it, to say it's okay with the same tone of voice that used to say, I love you, only now, without believing either phrase. And for a long time, I thought it was just a phase, that it would pass, that I just had to let time take its course. But time alone doesn't heal a wound that was buried carelessly. On the contrary, it festers. It wasn't until I started talking about it that I realized how many other women carry the same pain. Women who were betrayed not only by their partners, but also by their own expectations, by the hope that love was enough, that those who love don't hurt. And this opened a space within me, a space to listen, to welcome. Because before that, I only felt isolated, as if she were the only idiot in the story. But when we share, the pain changes color. It doesn't disappear, but it finds meaning. And you know what was hardest to accept? It wasn't that he did what he did. It was that I stopped seeing myself after that. It was the time I spent comparing myself, sabotaging myself, trying to understand why I wasn't enough. It's a hidden truth that few people admit. Betrayal destroys you first from within. And then, much later, it begins to show on the outside. This journey taught me more about myself than any book, any advice, any lecture on love and self-esteem. Because when everything breaks, you either rebuild yourself or live broken. And I didn't want to live like that anymore. I didn't want to be held hostage by the version of myself he destroyed. Little by little, I reclaimed parts of myself I hadn't even remembered existed. I started listening to myself again. I respected myself. I stopped romanticizing what had clearly been a selfish and cowardly choice. And then I started to breathe again, for real. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Comment below. This makes sense to me if you've ever felt this silent pain taking over everything and had to fight to find yourself again. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything, but I started writing. And it was through writing that I rebuilt myself. Because there was so much trapped inside me, so much I'd never said, so much I'd swallowed silently, that the words began to come out like someone finally finding air after a long time underwater. At first, it was just a rant, sentences scattered on scraps of paper, formless, aimless. But as the words took shape, I realized it was my voice returning. It was my story, told my way, unfiltered, unashamed. It was at that moment that I understood that silence hurts more than facing the pain head-on. I could have stayed quiet, keeping up appearances, pretending everything was fine, but I had already done that for too long. I had already lost myself too much trying to preserve an image that was never real, and when we spend too much time trying to hide the truth, it begins to corrode us from within. So, in that simple moment, sitting alone, with a pen in my hand and my heart in pieces, I made the choice that changed everything. I chose to free myself, freeing myself from the victim role, freeing myself from guilt that wasn't mine, freeing myself from the expectation of being perfect and strong all the time. The truth is, there's a kind of strength that comes when we allow ourselves to fall, when we stop resisting what was and accept what is. It was a shift in mindset, a decision that didn't come with fireworks or grand speeches. It was subtle, but profound, as if I had returned to inhabit my own body after years of living outside myself. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It came slowly, in the silence of the early mornings when I cried and wrote, in the days when I looked back and, for the first time, didn't blame myself for having loved someone so much that they broke me. It came when I stopped asking, why did he do that? And started asking, why did I accept so little of myself? This is the part no one tells you. The pain of betrayal can be the beginning of a journey of self-discovery that changes everything. But we must be willing to walk this path with courage. Courage to face one's own shadows. Courage to rewrite the narrative without needing validation. Courage to look at who we were without shame and say, you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. And when this compassion arises, it begins to heal everything that seemed impossible to heal. The impact of the pain was still there, of course, because scars don't go away. But they stop hurting when we understand that surviving was, indeed, a victory. And then, something began to change. The way I saw myself. I stopped being the betrayed woman, and I became the woman who chose not to remain silent. The woman who rose up, even with her heart in ruins. The woman who transformed the backdrop of an intimate tragedy into a story of overcoming. And that, in itself, was a new beginning, a new narrative, and most importantly, a new version of myself. I don't know if you've ever been through something similar, if you've ever found yourself sinking into a heavy silence, waiting for someone to notice, for someone to reach out. What I've learned is that sometimes the hand we're waiting for is our own. We're the ones who need to decide to leave the place of pain, not to pretend it didn't happen, but to make it a turning point. The pain that nearly destroyed me became fuel to rebuild me, and it was then that I discovered it wasn't about him. It never was. It was about me, about everything I'd left behind, about the woman who existed behind the role of wife, fiancé, partner. It was about listening to myself again, prioritizing myself again, loving myself again. I had been betrayed, yes, but now it was time to be true to myself. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Comment. I'm on this journey too. If you feel that you are, little by little, choosing to free yourself too. I thought the cure was forgetting. Then I saw it was remembering, without bleeding. And that's when my story truly began to change. Because for so long, I tried to erase everything. Erase his face, his words, our wedding night, the cold looks, the smiles that I now know hid guilt. Erase the image I'd created of a love that never existed the way I imagined. But no eraser can remove from memory what the soul carries so heavily. And one day, after running away for so long, I stopped. I sat with myself, and I listened. I heard that voice I'd stifled for years, the voice that told me I deserved more, that I deserved to be loved truly, with presence, with choice, not as a convenient option, but as a daily decision. The voice that deep down always knew something was wrong, but that preferred silence to solitude. We do that, don't we? We deceive ourselves so as not to hurt. But deception also hurts, only slowly, without warning. And this silent pain is the most treacherous of all. I began to realize that healing wouldn't come from someone apologizing. It wouldn't come from an explanation, a justification. Because sometimes the truth is you don't have an answer that can fix what was broken. What you do have is decision. The decision to face the pain with courage, to recognize that we were hurt, but we are not the wound. And I began to understand that, to heal, I needed to stop blaming myself for having believed. I did what I knew. I loved as I could. And that, in itself, is noble. I began rebuilding my life little by little. A new habit here, a lighter thought there. I started walking slower, eating mindfully, looking in the mirror with less demand and more affection. Simple things, but they gradually brought me back to myself. Because deep down, the real betrayal wasn't his. It was mine, when I stopped listening to myself, when I placed all my worth in the hands of someone who couldn't hold on. This reconnection with myself was what transformed me the most. And it wasn't a pretty process. It was lonely, confusing, full of setbacks. There were days when I felt guilty again, thinking that maybe I'd done something wrong. But healing isn't a straight line. Some days we take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And that's okay. The important thing is to keep going back inward, to keep choosing yourself, even when the outside world tells you otherwise. I began to notice my own body's signals, the tension in my chest when something wasn't right, the tears that welled up even for no apparent reason, the weariness that wasn't physical, but rather soul deep. And I learned to respect these signals, to no longer remain silent, to no longer pretend, because every time I remained silent to please others, a little piece of me died, and I had already died in life for far too long. Today, when I remember everything, it's not with anger. It's with respect. Respect for everything I've lived and survived. Respect for the woman I was, even when I was lost. Because deep down, every version of me just wanted to be loved. And today, I am. Not by someone outside, but by myself. And that, for me, is true freedom. The freedom of no longer needing anyone to validate me, choose me, save me. This journey made me realize how much truth liberates, even when it shatters us inside. Because only after everything fell apart was I able to rebuild something true within myself. And it was in silence that this happened. Not by shouting, not by confrontation, but by listening, by being present, by respecting my own story. It was pain that taught me to listen to myself. And ironically, it was pain that taught me what true love is. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Write down, this makes sense to me. If at some point in your journey, you also needed to listen to yourself to finally heal. Today, I tell this story because I know there are people living this in silence. And I say, those who free themselves are not lost. We only lose what we never truly had. And sometimes, we need to see everything crumble to understand that what seemed like love was just attachment, fear, or a childish hope that the other person would change. But life has taught me, with time and wounds, that no one changes for us, and that our salvation never comes from outside. That girl who once believed in promises at the altar, who prepared herself to live a fairy tale, is now a woman with scars but no chains. A grandmother who learned to transform pain into learning, who courageously looked at her own story and decided to rewrite it all with her own hand. Because waiting for others to recognize what they did, or for justice to come from the outside, is to cling to what hurt. I didn't want that anymore. I chose to rise from the ashes, and it was from the ashes of my pain that I drew my strength. I know not everyone understands this kind of transformation. Some people think we should just swallow it, forget it, and move on as if nothing happened. But anyone who's ever carried this kind of silence knows how heavy it is. I had to scream inside for years before I had the courage to speak out loud. And even after I discovered everything, there was a time when I still tried to protect him, or protect the image I'd created of him. Our minds are like that. They try to preserve what was once comfortable, even when it's become a prison. But time doesn't stop, and it takes its toll. It takes the choices we don't make from us. It takes the toll on what we bury. I chose to stop paying that price. And it was when I started telling, writing, opening up my story, even when I was afraid, even when I was trembling, that I began to breathe differently. Because when we hide, the pain ferments. When we tell, the pain heals. And it's not that it disappears. It becomes a scar, yes, but a scar that no longer hurts. It only reminds. It only warns. Today, looking back, I can see all the versions of myself with compassion. The girl in love, the deceived woman, the bride smiling without knowing, the weary wife trying to save something that had already died. I don't hate any of them. Each did the best they could with what they knew. But the one I'm most proud of is this one now. The one who learned to choose herself. The one who understood that being strong isn't about enduring everything. It's about knowing when to let go. And that's why I speak with such certainty. Those who free themselves are not lost. If you're holding on to a love that hurts you, if you're silencing a pain that screams inside, listen here. What's holding you back isn't love, it's fear. And we face fear, not feed it. Sometimes, the greatest proof of love you can give is to yourself. And this proof doesn't come with flowers, nor with promises. It comes with respected silence, with established boundaries, with firm goodbyes. It hurts, yes, but it frees. I tell you this not to make you feel sorry for me, but to let you know it's possible. That there's life after disappointment, after betrayal, after a fall. There's laughter after tears. There's truth after lies. And most importantly, there's a version of you inside that hasn't yet been stifled by fear. It's just waiting for a sign to come out. Maybe this is your sign. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Comment below. I deserve more than silence if any part of this story resonated within you, even if it was just a whisper. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you. Truly. This kind of story isn't easy to tell, nor to hear, but when we share, the pain shifts. It stops being a prison and becomes a bridge between those who experienced it and those who feel it. If at any point you recognized yourself, if any of the words touched you, leave a comment here saying, "I'm with you until the end." This is how we find each other, even in silence. Take the opportunity to enjoy this video, not just for me, but for everything we've built through this conversation. And if you want to keep hearing real stories, the kind that touch the soul and warm the heart, subscribe to the channel. There's so much life hidden here, waiting for someone like you to listen. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there. We still have a lot to talk about.